My name is Alex, and for 7 years, I was a volunteer for the Port Blossom Boxing Day swim. If you've never heard of it, I wouldn't be surprised. It wasn't a huge event like the ones in Tenby or Sunderland that draw thousands. Ours was a much smaller, local tradition, but it had been going for 51 years. It was one of those things that just marked the calendar, a real community staple. People who'd moved away would come home for Christmas just to say they'd done the swim. It's a tradition in parts of the UK that goes back decades, a way to shake off the Christmas indulgence and raise a bit of money for a good cause. Our cause was always the local RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, the crews who keep our coasts safe. There's a bit of irony in that, when I think about what happened. That morning started out just like every other Boxing Day I could remember. The sky was a solid, flat grey, the colour of a slate roof. A sharp wind was blowing in off the water, carrying that clean, biting smell of salt and cold stone. The sea itself was strangely calm, like a sheet of dark, wrinkled steel that barely seemed to be moving. The water temperature was hovering around a brisk 8 degrees Celsius. That's cold enough to pose a serious risk, but that was sort of the point. The thrill was in the madness of it all. The beach was a happy, chaotic mess. Spectators were bundled up in heavy coats and scarves, holding thermoses of hot chocolate, or maybe something a little stronger, their breath pluming in the air. The swimmers themselves were a riot of colour and absurdity against the muted winter backdrop. Wearing a ridiculous costume is a huge part of the tradition. I saw a group of guys dressed as penguins, a woman with an elaborate mermaid tail, and at least 3 different superheroes arguing about who would be the most hydrodynamic. The air was just filled with laughter and excited chatter. This little pocket of warmth on a cold day. My job, along with 4 other volunteers, was simple but critical. We were the official counters. We were the ones in orange high-vis jackets at the entry and exit point. Our boring plain swimsuits hidden under thick winter jackets. We weren't allowed to join in, but we were all lifeguard trained, so it helped to be ready just in case. We had a trestle table set up with registration sheets, hot drinks, and most importantly, the numbered wristbands. Everyone on the beach had to have a wristband, including us. I was lucky number 001 that year. I was the longest standing volunteer, and the others thought it some sort of privilege to let me have it. It was meaningless, but sweet. 250 people had pre-registered online. As they showed up, we'd check them off, hand them a waterproof wristband with their unique number, and wish them luck. Anyone just showing up on the day got a wristband from a separate batch. It was a system we had down to a science. 2 of us, myself included, stood at the water's edge with clicker counters. 1 click for every person who ran into the waves. 2 others were positioned further up the beach at the finish line, a small tent with towels and foil blankets. Their job was to count everyone coming out. We were meticulous about it. We had to be. When you're responsible for hundreds of people running into water that cold, you don't leave a single thing to chance. That kind of cold can trigger an involuntary reaction the second you hit the water. Your body makes you gasp for air uncontrollably and you start hyperventilating. It's called cold water shock. If your head's underwater when that gasp happens, it can be fatal. The feeling usually passes in about a minute, but that first minute is easily the most dangerous part of any cold water swim. After that, you're fighting hypothermia, the slow, creeping cold that messes with your head and your ability to move. So yes, we counted. We counted them in, and we counted them out. And the numbers always matched, until that day. At 11 a.m. on the dot, a retired fisherman named George blasted an old air horn. The sound ripped across the beach, and with a collective roar, the crowd surged forward. It was a beautiful, ridiculous sight. a wave of humanity, all noise and colour, crashing into the grey, silent sea. The screams as the cold hit were immediate, a mix of shock and pure joy. From where I was standing, I could see the massive heads bobbing in the water. Most people only stayed in for a minute or two before scrambling back out, shivering and laughing. A few of the regulars, the tough year-round swimmers, struck out for a small buoy we had anchored about 50 metres out before turning back. I just stood there, my thumb on the counter. Click, click, click. I didn't even look up. I just focused on the line of people running past me into the surf. My colleague, a woman named Sarah, was doing the exact same thing. In less than 2 minutes, the last person was in the water. I glanced at my counter. 283. I called over to Sarah. 283, she confirmed, holding up her own clicker. The math checked out. 250 pre-registered. 33 who signed up on the day. Everything was right. The swimmers started pouring back out almost as fast as they'd gone in, their skin bright red, gasping for air, but most of them were grinning, high on adrenaline. They stumbled past the 2 volunteers at the exit tent who were handing out medals and clicking their own counters. It was a smooth, well-oiled machine. Within 15 minutes, the sea was empty again. It just lay there, flat and calm, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. The beach was buzzing again, as people wrapped themselves in towels and rushed to get into dry clothes. The smell of cheap coffee hung thick in the air. I walked up the beach to the exit tent to check the final numbers. That was the protocol. A 4-way check. My count, Sarah's count, and the 2 exit counts. I got to the tent just as Martin, the lead volunteer, was looking at his clipboard with a frown. "What's up?" I asked, a little knot of unease already tightening in my stomach. Martin looked up, his brow furrowed. "Linda's got 282 on her clicker." "So do I." "You?" "Sarah and I both have 283, I said. Martin's frown deepened. A 1-person difference. It had happened before, but it was extremely rare. It was always a simple counting error. Someone gets missed in the rush, or a clicker gets hit twice by accident. "All right," Martin said, his voice calm, in charge. "Let's not panic. First things first, we do a recount. Everyone who swam, can you please come back to the tent for a moment?" His voice carried across the beach, and people began shuffling back toward us, grumbling good-naturedly. We went through the process of physically counting every single person wearing a wristband. We did it twice. Both times we landed on the same number, 282. A different kind of quiet fell over our little group of volunteers then. The party atmosphere on the beach seemed to just evaporate, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged awareness. We were 1 person short. Somewhere between the shore and the sea, we had lost someone. "Okay," Martin said, his voice tight. "Nobody leaves the beach. Nobody." He was already on his radio, his voice stripped of all warmth, just a clipped, professional staccato. "This is Martin at the Port Blossom swim. We have a potential situation here. We have a missing swimmer." Panic is a funny thing. It doesn't always hit you like a lightning bolt. Sometimes it just seeps in, slow and steady, like the tide coming in. At first, it was just confusion. Swimmers were looking around, counting their own friends, pointing, trying to work out who was missing. But as the minutes ticked by and Martin's radio calls got more and more urgent, the whole mood on the beach shifted. The laughter died, replaced by hushed, anxious whispers. The cold, which had been thrilling just a few minutes ago, now felt genuinely menacing. Our training kicked in. The first and only assumption you make is that the person is still in the water. We told all the swimmers to get their warm clothes on over their wet gear and huddle together. We couldn't have mass hypothermia on top of everything else. Then we started the slow, agonizing job of checking every single person against our registration sheets. Each swimmer was asked for their name, and we ticked them off the list. It was tedious work. The wind seemed to pick up, whining around the tent, and a light, misty rain started to fall. The local RNLI lifeboat, which had been sitting just offshore as a precaution, was now moving slowly back and forth, its crew scanning the calm surface of the water. 2 lifeguards in dry suits waded into the shallows with long poles, probing the seabed. Just seeing the official search begin sent a fresh wave of fear through everyone. This was real. As a counter, my job was now to help find out who we were looking for. We had the sheets for the 250 pre-registered swimmers and the separate one for the 33 who signed up that morning. As other volunteers called out names, we ticked them off. Name after name was accounted for. The stack of confirmed names got bigger, and the list of unchecked names got smaller. It was an agonizing process of elimination. Every person we found was a tiny moment of relief, immediately followed by the sickening dread that we were one step closer to finding the one person who wasn't there. Maybe they just got out and went home, one of the younger volunteers asked, her voice full of hope. It was a nice thought, but we had to dismiss it. We did a quick check of the area where people had left their bags. A single pile of clothes remained unclaimed, a worn-out fleece, a pair of old sneakers, and a car key. A small, sad pile for a person who wasn't there. Could they have had a medical emergency? A heart attack from the shock, someone else murmured. It was a grim but real possibility, but if that had happened, in a crowd that size, someone would have seen something. We asked. No one had seen anyone in distress. The water had been a flurry of splashing and shouting. Surely someone would have noticed. The minutes dragged into an hour. The initial adrenaline of the crisis was wearing off, replaced by a cold, grinding fear. The rain was coming down harder now, plastering our hair to our heads and soaking through our jackets. Most of the spectators had gone home, their festive mood completely shattered. All that was left was the swimmers and the emergency services, a grim picture on a grey beach. Finally, after almost 90 minutes of checking and rechecking, we had it. One name was left on the list, one name that hadn't been ticked off. Wristband number 178. A pre-registered swimmer. A woman named Clara Jenkins. The name just hung there in the air. Clara Jenkins. A local woman, late 40s. She was a regular at the swim, and everyone knew she was a strong, experienced swimmer. It just didn't make any sense. She wasn't the type to get into trouble without anyone noticing. Martin took the details and walked a short distance away to make a call. We all watched him, a small, tense huddle of orange jackets. We saw him talk, then pause listening. We saw his shoulders, which had been rigid with stress, suddenly just slump. A look of complete and utter confusion spread across his face. He ended the call and walked slowly back to us, his expression impossible to read. "She's gone, isn't she?" someone whispered. "Christ," Sarah said. Martin shook his head once. "No," he said. "She's at home." "I just spoke to her," Martin said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. A wave of relief washed over me. "Is she okay?" "Where is she?" I asked. Martin just looked at me, and his eyes were wide with a kind of bewilderment that was 10 times scarier than the panic had been. "She's at home," he said. "She broke her ankle 2 days ago, falling down the stairs. She didn't come today. She never left her house. For a second, nobody said a word. The only sound was the whip of the wind and the distant hum of the lifeboat's engine. It didn't compute. But her wristband, Sarah stammered. Number 178. We gave it out. Someone took it. Someone checked in as Clara Jenkins. Her name is ticked on the check-in sheet, I added, my mind racing. I remember ticking it. Someone came to the desk, said their name was Clara Jenkins, and we gave them the wristband. So, who's wearing wristband 178? Martin asked, looking out at the anxious crowd of 282 swimmers. The relief we'd just felt vanished, and something much stranger and colder took its place. The problem wasn't that we were missing a swimmer. Clara Jenkins was fine. The problem was we had counted 283 people going into the water. We now had 282 people accounted for on the beach, and the person who was supposed to be the missing one had never even been here. We weren't missing a person. We had an extra one. An impossible phantom swimmer who had checked in, taken a wristband, run into the sea, and then just vanished from the count. This is where the story turns. This is where a logical, tragic emergency tipped over into something else entirely. Searching for a missing person is a race against time, a fight against the cold. But how do you search for someone who, by all logical accounts, shouldn't even exist? The police had shown up by now, and a senior officer, a local guy I knew named Sergeant Miller, was trying to make sense of Martin's frantic explanation. So let me get this straight, Miller said, his patience clearly wearing thin. You counted 283 people going in, but only 282 came out. But the person you thought was the 283rd is safe at home? Exactly, Martin said. So your count was just wrong from the start, Miller concluded with a sigh. Someone made a mistake. You thought you counted 283, but there were only ever 282. No, I insisted, stepping forward. 4 of us counted. 2 of us counted them in, 2 of us counted them out. The in count was 283. The out count was 282. The head count on the beach is 282. Someone is missing. But we've accounted for everyone who swam, Sarah cried, her voice trembling. We've checked every single name. Everyone is here. Sergeant Miller held up a hand. Okay, let's just calm down. It's cold. Everyone's stressed. The most logical explanation here is a simple miscount. Classic human error. He was trying to be reassuring, to put a neat and tidy box around the mess. But I knew what I counted. Sarah knew what she counted. It was then that one of the lifeguards who'd been searching the shallows came jogging up the beach. Sarge, he called out. Didn't find anyone. Water's clear, but you should probably see this. He was pointing towards a small, rocky outcrop at the far end of the beach, away from the crowd. I followed his finger, and that's when I saw her. Standing on the wet black rocks, maybe 100 yards away, was a lone figure, a woman. She was standing perfectly still, just looking out at the sea. She was dripping wet, wearing a simple dark swimsuit, just like any other swimmer. But something was profoundly wrong. Everyone else was huddled together, wrapped in blankets, shivering violently. This woman was standing all alone, seemingly untouched by the biting wind and the cold that should have been making her tremble. Her posture was unnaturally straight, her arms hanging limp at her sides. Is that her? Is that our missing person? Sergeant Miller asked, already starting to walk toward the figure. A few of us followed, our feet crunching on the wet sand. As we got closer, the feeling of wrongness got stronger. We were about 20 feet away when I started to notice the details. Water was running off her in little streams, but there was no steam rising from her skin in the cold air. Her hair, long and dark, was plastered to her head, but it didn't move an inch in the wind. She was like a statue. "Ma'am," Sergeant Miller called out. "Are you all right? Were you part of the swim?" The figure didn't turn. She stayed completely motionless, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Ma'am, I need you to talk to us," Miller said, his voice firmer now. He took another step forward, and then she turned her head. It was a slow, smooth motion that wasn't quite fluid and wasn't quite mechanical. She turned and looked directly at us, and we all froze. Her face was blank. Not emotionless, but unfinished. The features were all there, eyes, nose, and mouth, but they looked like a sculptor's first rough attempt. There were no fine lines, no character, no story in her face. It was impossibly, symmetrically bland. And her eyes, they were wide and dark, and they were pointed right at us. But they weren't seeing us, and they did not blink. Not once. A smile slowly spread across her face. It was the most awful thing I have ever seen. It wasn't a real smile. It didn't touch her eyes. It was a perfect, crescent-shaped imitation of one. A gesture her muscles were making without any feeling behind it. It was the smile you see on a mannequin. A vacant, painted-on happiness. They call it the Uncanny Valley, that feeling of revulsion you get when something looks almost, but not quite, human. This was a deep, terrifying dive into that valley. "My God," Sarah whispered next to me. No one moved. We were all just frozen, caught in the gaze of this thing. The cold I'd felt before was nothing compared to the ice that was now creeping up my spine. This wasn't a person with hypothermia. This was something else. Sergeant Miller, to his credit, recovered first. He was a cop. He dealt with strange and tragic things for a living, but even he was rattled. "Ma'am," he said, his voice strained. "What's your name?" The smiling thing just tilted its head, a gesture of curiosity that was completely empty of it. The smile never changed. "Where's your wristband?" I heard myself ask, my voice sounding thin and far away. At the mention of the wristband, the figure slowly, deliberately, raised its left arm, and there on its wrist was a band. It was one of ours. From this distance, I couldn't make out the number. "Okay," Miller said, taking a cautious step closer. "Let's just get you warmed up. We can sort all this out." He reached a hand out to warn her. As his fingers got within an inch of her arm, the smile vanished. Her face went blank, and then she was gone. She didn't run. She didn't move. 1 second she was there, a solid, dripping figure on the rocks. The next, the space she had occupied was just empty. There was no sound, no flash of light, just a sudden, total absence. We stared at the empty rocks for what felt like forever. The rain was still falling. The sea was still grey. Nothing had changed, but everything was different. Sergeant Miller was pale, his mouth hanging slightly open. He slowly lowered his hand. What in God's name was that?" Sarah whimpered. No one had an answer. We walked slowly to the rocks where she had been. There were no footprints. The rocks were wet from the rain, but there was no sign that anyone had been standing there at all. The official report, the one Sergeant Miller had to write, was a masterpiece of creative omission. It concluded that the initial count of 283 swimmers was an administrative error, probably from a faulty clicker or just a simple mistake in the chaos. All 282 registered and participating swimmers were accounted for, safe and sound. The end. There was no mention of the unclaimed pile of clothes, which vanished from the beach sometime during the confusion. There was no mention of a phone call to a woman with a broken ankle. And there was definitely no mention of a smiling, unblinking woman on the rocks who disappeared into thin air. But those of us who were there, the handful of volunteers and the cops who saw her, we know what we saw. We never really spoke about it. What could you even say? How do you describe something so fundamentally wrong? It just became this silent shared secret in our little coastal town. The Port Blossom Boxing Day. Swim happened one more time, the next year. Only 74 people showed up. The whole atmosphere was just somber and scared. You could see people glancing over their shoulders, looking toward the rocks. The tradition, after 52 years, just died. I moved away from Port Blossom a few years after that. I could never shake the feeling that haunted that beach. I could never look at the calm surface of the sea without thinking about what might be under it, or what might be able to just step out of it. I never found an explanation. I looked into local folklore, old sea stories, anything that might offer a clue. But I found nothing. It was just this single, terrifying event that didn't fit with anything. A ghost in the machine of our careful, logical world. But there is one last, chilling detail. One thing I've never told anyone, not even the other volunteers. That wristband. The one that was meant for Clara Jenkins, number 178. After the chaos was over and we were packing up our table, I found it lying on the sand, right where the entrance to the water had been. It was pristine, unused. No one had ever checked in as Clara Jenkins. No one had taken her number, which means the number I saw on the wrist of that inhuman thing on the rocks, it wasn't 178. I only saw it for a second, a flash of white against its strangely smooth, wet skin. But I know what number I saw. It was my number, the number from the wristband I was wearing as a volunteer. It was number 001. I've spent years trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything, that it was coincidence, a trick of the light. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if that thing wasn't copying someone who didn't exist. I wonder if it was choosing. I don't volunteer anymore. I told people it was because I moved away, because life changed, because traditions fade. The truth is, I couldn't stand on that beach again knowing what I'd seen. I still keep in touch with the others though. The volunteers. We have a group chat that's gone quiet over the years, slowly filling with birthdays, then nothing at all. As time slipped by, people stopped talking about that day. It became something awkward and distant. A story you don't tell newcomers. Until today. Sarah is restarting the tradition. She's going to be the first one in. She was just about to set off for the swim when she sent me a picture message. She's standing in her hallway, phone held up. Showing off a new dark swimsuit, she looks confident, calm, beautiful and professional, all at the same time. It's the kind of photo you send when everything feels normal. But in the shadow of the image, just at the edge, where the light doesn't quite reach, I can see it. The wristband, white, clean. The number printed on it is unmistakable. 001. Hi everyone, thanks for listening. That story was written by me and that friend that never wants to be known, so, as always, I'll be taking the credit. If you enjoyed it, hit subscribe, like, and maybe join the membership so you can say I was here before she got weirdly famous. Perks include cool emojis, member badges, early access to videos and more. Oh, and I've lowered the top tier price, right down to its minimum, just in case anyone fancies an upgrade. You get everything from the first tier, plus merch discounts, member-only videos, and also have a story written about you if you stay for 3 months. Which would be a pretty cool thing to tell your friends, right? Yes, it would. Don't lie. Speaking of merch, I have merch now, so check that out. A massive shout out to my members. Or rather, member, Mark Mathern 7322. If you're on a mobile or tablet, please consider hyping the video. It pushes it a tiny bit further out into the YouTube wild. If you really, really enjoyed it, I think I have that super thanks button down there somewhere. Even £1 helps me toward my goal of making this a full-time thing. Then I can just have one full-time thing instead of my day job and this full-time. I'm here a lot. Fun fact you didn't ask for but are getting anyway. UK Boxing Day and New Year's Day swims are often organised to raise money for the RNLI, which has always felt slightly counterintuitive to me, given that cold water swims are dangerous enough that the RNLI often have to be on standby in the first place. Smart. Good night.